So one question that activists often have is, how can we change public opinion? And or does protest matter at all? And people think historically about cases like the civil rights movement as sort of tearing and, particularly graphic images and how that they of children being, attacked by dogs or by fire hoses, and that this, at least in popular consciousness, sort of raised awareness about the issue and sort of pulled at people's heartstrings. But this is, of course, sort of like selecting on the potentially the most successful social movement in American history. The average, not to be a downer, but the average social movement probably won't be as successful as the African-American civil rights movement. So when scholars take a look at the ability of social movements to influence public opinion, they think about two things. One, are you able to sort of raise awareness about your issue? So that is, if you have a new issue, will people begin to care, even think about it or care about it, think that it's, something that they should do something about it. And the second part is, should they be sort of more favorable to you? So that is, they used to think that, clubbing baby seals was wrong, but after they saw your graphic images, they decided that nope, you should not club baby seals. In fact, they should be protected. And so it's potentially useful then to think about, what social movement activists do and how they're able to influence these two sort of discrete things. And so the first part is, are social movement activists able to raise awareness of the issue? And I think that there's this isn't an area that's tremendously studied, but I think the sort of consensus would be that yes, combined with sort of all the other political factors that are going on, often social movements are able to raise awareness about issues. And I think we've seen this most recently, both in the case of like Occupy Wall Street, which raised the issue of income inequality, something we're talking about now in a way that we weren't 5 years ago. Even before then, on the right wing end of things, the Tea Party, which raised issues about taxes and smaller government. These are definitely long-standing issues, but issues that became much, more on people's minds, that people thought about. And then finally, we can think about the Black Lives Matter movement more recently, which has certainly raised awareness among the public about police brutality and more generally about contemporary African American issues. Now, that brings us to the second part is the so what, right? So that you've raised a general awareness of it. Does this, have you changed anyone's mind? Here, there's sort of little evidence that, movements are unfortunately able to change people's minds. You might be able to arouse attentions, but for the most part, unfortunately, movements generally don't necessarily convince people of one thing or the other, of one side or the other. This is particularly true of movements that are fairly well sort of established and that people have sort of frames of understanding what's going on. So taking an issue like, the death penalty or abortion, these are sort of issues that people feel strongly about for the most part, even if they aren't, caring about them. And sort of driving past people holding up signs isn't going to change your opinion, switch anyone from pro-life to pro-choice. So the power of social movements to sort of make a public, a difference in public opinion is primarily through, this raising awareness of issues. And then one might finally ask, well, so what? Does public opinion matter? And here again, it's potentially useful for getting stuff on the agenda of politicians, particularly those who are sympathetic. So that is, again, sort of lots of people talking about police brutality is unlikely to convince conservative, Republican elected officials to, vote a different way. And likewise, a Tea Party protest won't convince a liberal member of Congress, that they need to slash taxes. But it might elected officials who would potentially be sympathetic to you if they knew about your issue, those are the people who are likely to sort of take the ball and run with it. So that is, switching things around. The Tea Party candidates, which raise awareness about public awareness again about taxes or smaller government, potentially sympathetic, Republican members of Congress are then able to, take the ball and run with it. And likewise, police brutality, again, potentially sympathetic elected officials or mayors can introduce legislation or make sort of meaningful reforms once the awareness of the issue has been raised. And one last sort of point has to do with how movements are able to raise public opinion. And here it's a sort of very dicey game. That is, the thing in general, you're not able to reach out to everyone and change their opinion individually. For the most part, this is mediated by things like social media or the newspaper or radio or TV. And the things that make the front page of the newspaper, these sorts of dramatic events that protesters are inclined to do, and are maybe not always the same things that make people at all sympathetic to your cause. And so the long history of this has to do with when you think about, for example, like the Vietnam War, where anti-war protesters certainly raised the issue very well, but at the same time were often portrayed as sort of a lunatic fringe and often just made the newspaper when they were arrested. So again, there is this sort of delicate balance that activists struggle with, and which social movement scholars don't have the answer of, sort of how to raise your awareness of your issue, make the media in a way that will make people not hate you. So thanks very much. Again, I'm Neal Caren at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.